Hello, and welcome back to Medieval History. Today, we delve into a story so extraordinary it seems ripped from the pages of myth. The tale of Joan of Arc. She was a peasant girl who, in a time of national collapse, rose from obscurity to command an army, save a king, and fundamentally change the course of the Hundred Years' War. Her life was a dazzling, improbable blaze that lasted just 2 short years before ending in tragedy, making her France's most enduring national hero. Our story begins not in a castle, but in the small, unassuming village of Domrémy in eastern France around 1412. This was the darkest hour for France. The Hundred Years' War was raging, and the French monarchy was in ruins. The English, allied with the powerful Burgundian faction of the French nobility, controlled vast swathes of the country, including Paris. The legitimate king, Charles VII, then just the uncrowned Dauphin, was a weak, demoralized figure, huddled away in Chinon, often mockingly called the King of Bourges after the small area he still controlled. The English king, Henry VI, was claiming the French throne, and it seemed France was destined to disappear under foreign rule. It was into this atmosphere of despair that Joan was born. She was a deeply religious peasant girl who could neither read nor write. But from the age of 13, she claimed to hear divine voices, those of Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret, instructing her to undertake 2 impossible tasks: raise the siege of Orléans and lead the Dauphin to his coronation at Reims. In 1429, Joan, convinced of her divine mission, travelled to the nearby garrison and demanded an escort to see the Dauphin at Chinon. It was a preposterous request, yet somehow she was granted safe passage. When she arrived, Charles VII tested her faith. According to legend, he disguised himself among his courtiers, but Joan immediately walked through the crowd and greeted him, delivering a private message that convinced him of her divine guidance. Charles, desperate and out of options, finally agreed to equip Joan. He gave her a suit of white armor, a banner embroidered with the fleur-de-lis, and, most importantly, a command over a contingent of troops. She claimed her sword was waiting for her behind the altar of a church near Fierbois. Upon being retrieved, it was said to be marked with 5 crosses, further solidifying her miraculous status among the demoralized French troops. Joan's arrival was not just a military asset, it was a psychological weapon. The English had believed they were fighting mere men. Now, they were convinced they were fighting a divinely inspired agent. The French soldiers, previously defeated and disheartened, found renewed hope and ferocious courage in her presence. Joan's first and greatest triumph came at the city of Orléans. The city, besieged by the English for months, was the last major stronghold preventing the English from sweeping south. Within days of her arrival in April 1429, Joan rallied the French commanders and soldiers. She didn't lead them through complex tactics. She led them through sheer, fearless force of will. She personally rode to the front line, carrying her banner rather than a sword, and inspired the French to launch aggressive, successful assaults. By May 8th, the English siege was broken, and they retreated. This victory was nothing short of miraculous. It shattered the perception of English invincibility and earned Joan the title, the Maid of Orléans. The immediate aftermath of Orléans saw a startling shift in momentum. Before Joan, the French military was defined by retreat and hesitation. After Orléans, they pursued the English relentlessly in the Loire campaign. This rapid-fire series of engagements, including victories at Jargeau, Meung-sur-Loire, and, critically, the Battle of Patay, decimated the remaining English field army in the region. Patay, in particular, was a rout, often compared to the catastrophic English victory at Agincourt in reverse. These victories demonstrated that the French had found their fighting spirit, and it was entirely due to the confidence Joan of Arc inspired in her soldiers and commanders. With the English reeling, Joan immediately pushed for her second mission, the coronation of Charles VII. The journey to Reims, the traditional site for French coronations, was long and dangerous, requiring the army to march deep into enemy territory. Joan successfully cleared the path, and in July 1429, Charles VII was formally crowned King of France in Reims Cathedral. This act was tremendously significant. It transformed Charles from the mocked Dauphin into a legitimate, God-sanctioned monarch in the eyes of the French people. Joan had delivered on her divine promise and restored the spiritual heart of the French monarchy. However, after Reims, Joan's influence began to wane. Charles VII and his cautious advisors were hesitant to continue her aggressive campaigns. Joan urged an immediate assault on Paris, but the attack failed, and she was wounded. The Dauphin's court became increasingly suspicious of her, and her meteoric rise began its descent. The political maneuvering against Joan was complex and cruel. The French courts established nobles and military leaders, many of whom had years of experience, resented the power and direct access to the king held by a peasant girl. They saw her as a threat to their own influence and prestige. The failures after Reims, particularly the unsuccessful siege of Paris, gave her critics the ammunition they needed. While Joan believed her mission was still divine, the king and his council effectively marginalized her, preferring more traditional, less risky military strategies that preserved royal funds and political favor. This political isolation left her increasingly exposed. The end came swiftly. In 1430, while defending the town of Compiègne against the Burgundians, Joan was thrown from her horse and captured. The French king, Charles VII, made no serious attempt to ransom her, demonstrating the political expediency of his advisors and perhaps his own growing discomfort with her power. The Burgundians sold her to the English, who were determined to discredit Charles VII by proving Joan was not a divine agent, but a heretic. The English orchestrated a politically motivated trial for heresy, led by pro-English French clerics. The charges were based on her claim of divine guidance and her wearing of men's clothing, a profound offense against contemporary religious law. Despite days of grueling interrogation without legal counsel, Joan initially held firm. But under threat of immediate execution, the exhausted, imprisoned girl recanted. Yet, just days later, she defiantly resumed her men's clothing, claiming her voices had reproached her for the recantation. This act sealed her fate. On May 30th, 1431, at the age of 19, Joan of Arc was burned at the stake in the marketplace of Rouen. The entire proceeding was a political spectacle designed to demoralize the French resistance, but it had the opposite effect. Her execution, witnessed by large crowds of both French and English, cemented her status as a martyr in the eyes of the French people. Joan's death was tragic, but her impact was permanent. Her life had demonstrated that the French cause was not only viable, but divinely blessed. Her martyrdom galvanized French national sentiment. Charles VII, finally secure in his authority, used the decades following her death to drive the English completely out of France, successfully ending the 100 Years' War in 1453. Decades later, Charles VII himself commissioned an investigation that ultimately annulled Joan's conviction, declaring her innocent and a martyr. In 1920, the Catholic Church formally recognized her sacrifice by declaring her a saint. Joan of Arc remains one of the most astonishing figures in history, a young woman who, through absolute faith and sheer courage, saved a kingdom and became a timeless symbol of patriotism, bravery, and the impossible power of belief. If you were inspired by the incredible story of the Maid of Orléans, please hit that like button and subscribe to Medieval History for more world-changing tales. Let us know in the comments, what modern figure best embodies Joan's courage? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.